In this game, the world champion Alexander Alekhine found a brilliant queen sacrifice, after which he got a far advanced passed pawn, which turned out to be much stronger than his opponent's extra queen, and the game was over on move 20. Alekhine started with e4, and his opponent Saemisch played the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, knight c6, Alekhine chose an unusual, uncommon move order. Instead of d4, he first develops his bishop, bishop e2, e6, castle kingside d6, and now d4. c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6. Attacking the pawn, and the common move would have been knight c3, of course, developing the knight and defending the pawn. However, in this game, Alekhine wanted to move his c-pawn to c4, creating a pawn structure known as the Marozzi point. And after knight c3, of course, the pawn on c2 would be blocked. That's why he defends his e4 pawn with a bishop, bishop f3. However, this move is a little bit dubious, because the bishop on f3 is blocking the f-pawn. And Saemisch plays knight e5. His idea is to exchange on f3 and get the advantage of two bishops. However, Alekhine in his annotations writes that although black gets the advantage of two bishops, black spends too much time to achieve this and falls behind in development. So Alekhine plays c4. Now black of course cannot capture the pawn. That would be a blunder because of queen a4 check, and black is losing the knight. That's why Saemisch simply captures on f3 and gets the advantage of two bishops, and plays bishop e7, preparing the short castle. And now that the pawn is on c4, Alekhine develops his knight, knight c3, short castle b3. Alekhine is going to fianchetto his bishop, and from b2 the bishop will exert very unpleasant pressure on the long diagonal. That's why Saemisch, in order to oppose this bishop on b2, wants to move his own bishop to f6, and plays knight d7, vacating the f6 square for his bishop. Bishop b2, bishop f6, attacking the knight. That's why Alekhine plays rook d1, defending his knight and creating an immediate threat, knight b5, which would attack the backward pawn on d6 twice, with a knight and with a rook. That's why Saemisch made a prophylactic move a6, taking under control b5 square. Alekhine plays queen g3, attacking the pawn and unblocking his f-pawn, so he is preparing the advance and active play the attack on the king side. Queen c7, defending the pawn. Now, before playing f4, Alekhine made an unnecessary prophylactic move, king h1, as after f4 this diagonal will be weakened, and after rook d8 he plays f4. And now Saemisch made a mistake. Instead of a move suggested by Grandmaster Kotov, who annotated this game in his book on Alekhine's greatest games, namely king h8, moving away from this unpleasant x-ray. You will see why it was important. Instead of this, Saemisch played b6, preparing the fianchetto of his bishop. However, this move turned out to be a serious mistake, and Alekhine crosses the center of the board and starts his strong attack. f5, creating an immediate threat of capturing on e6 twice and winning a pawn, with a fork actually. This move, f5, actually weakens the e5 square. However, Alekhine in his annotations writes that white's position is so dominant that the weakening of the e5 square isn't so important. So what to do? White is threatening to win a pawn on e6. If black plays knight e5, which looks like a natural move, centralizing the knight, immediately occupying the weakened square and opening the bishop's diagonal, defending the pawn on e6, that is actually losing on the spot after f takes e, opening the f-file with great effect. And it turns out that black doesn't have time to capture the pawn, because that would be followed by rook takes f6, and the pawn is pinned. Pawn cannot capture. Now you see why it was important to play king h8. Or instead of knight e5, if black eliminates one of the attackers of e6, namely the knight, by capturing on d4, that doesn't help either. After rook takes d4, attacking the d6 pawn two times, knight e5, defending it, but f6, creating a checkmating threat on g7, and after knight g6, bishop a3, attacking the pawn for the third time, and black's position collapses. Or if black plays e5, that would terribly weaken the d5 square, and the knight with great effect would jump on d5 with tempo, attacking the queen, and after queen b7, a strong move, knight e6. And the second knight also joins the attack with great effect, and black cannot capture the knight for the same reason. F takes e, and now the f file is open, the knight is under attack, the bishop is under attack, so black's position simply collapses. All black pieces are on the queen side and the king is alone, and it undergoes a deadly attack. That's why it would have been better, in order to defend the pawn on e6, to play rook e8 and defend the pawn. However, Saemisch made another move. A move which makes, at first sight, makes perfect sense. He played bishop e5, attacking the queen, and with tempo vacating the f6 square for his knight. So, after the queen moves, Saemisch was going to play knight f6. The knight, in this case, would have joined the defense of the king side, and the bishop's diagonal would have opened, and the e6 pawn would be defended in this case. And the position would have been more or less equal, as black would have solved all of his problems in this case. However, Alekhine found a brilliant solution. You can pause the video and try to find his move. What to do? The queen is under attack. So he simply sacrifices his queen and starts a deadly attack. He eliminates the e6 pawn, which is protecting the d5 square and doesn't let the knight jump on d5. So he captures on e6. It turns out that black must accept the sacrifice. If black doesn't capture the queen and plays f takes e, then simply knight takes e6, winning a pawn, attacking black queen in his turn. That's why Saemisch captures on g3. And he takes f check. So besides getting a great knight on d5, which is even more important, white has created a dangerous passed pawn. The pawn simply needs one move to promote. And it turns out that the king cannot move to f8. That would lose on the spot after knight e6 check with a fork. And black is losing, of course, in this case. Everything is under attack. The bishop, the rook. So the king must move to the corner. And now we can see another motif of this sacrifice. Back rank issues. Now, both of these pieces, the knight and the rook, must defend the f8 square. If one of them moves, white will immediately promote to queen and checkmate next move with the rook. So, what to do now? Of course, knight d5. With tempo activating the knight, knight is greatly placed and is attacking the queen. It turns out that the queen has only 4 squares to retreat. For example, if queen b8, then simply knight c6, attacking the queen, attacking the rook, and it will not be just a rook capture. If knight captures the rook, white will immediately create a checkmating threat with promotion to the queen. So, what to do? The queen is under attack. If queen moves, the only square is b7, then simply knight takes d8 with 2 threats, checkmating threat, and the queen is under attack. And if bishop e5, then simply bishop takes e5, d takes e, knight takes b8, rook takes b8, knight c7, a strong move, threatening knight e8, closing the rook's way to f8, which will create checkmating threat on f8. And after rook f8, knight e6, threatening to capture the rook, followed by rook d8. For example, if g6, then knight takes f8, knight takes f8, rook d8, and black is completely paralyzed and lost. Or, instead of, after knight d5, instead of queen b8, if queen a7, then again, knight c6, attacking the queen and the rook. And now, again, if queen b7, then simply knight takes d8 with 2 threats, promotion and capturing the queen. And if bishop e5, then simply bishop takes e5, d takes e, knight takes a7, rook takes a7, knight takes b6. The knight is pinned, of course. Black cannot capture it, and after rook f8, knight takes c8, rook takes c8, and then finally eliminating the defender of f8 by capturing on d7, and then promotion with checkmate next move. Or if queen b7, then knight e6, creating deadly threat, bishop takes g7 checkmate, and also threatening to capture the rook. What to do? If bishop e5, closing the bishop's diagonal, then simply knight takes d8, again with the same two threats, promotion with checkmate next move, and knight takes b7. Or after knight e6, instead of bishop e5, if rook g8, defending g7 from checkmate, then simply capturing the rook, king takes, knight e7 check, king h8, and again checkmate would. Or instead of all this, if the final retreat, queen c5, then again knight e6, again threatening checkmate and attacking the queen. For example, if bishop e5, closing the bishop's diagonal again, then simply bishop takes e5, d takes e, knight takes c5. Now the knight cannot capture, of course, because it must defend the f8 square. That would lead to immediate checkmate in two moves. That's why b takes c, but knight c7, attacking the rook and threatening deadly knight e8, closing the rook's diagonal line, threatening to promote. So after knight b8, rook b8, knight e8, and the knight is pinned, it cannot move, white is threatening promote to queen, and black is losing. That's why after knight b5, Saemisch resigned on move 20. Hit the like button as it's really helpful for the channel growth, and subscribe. See you in next videos.